So now let us begin with a brand new section of network security. Let us have a look at what you're going to learn in this section. So first we'll learn about the security filtering technique, in which we'll learn about access control lists, tunneling and VPN, that is a virtual private network. Then we'll see the SSL and TLS protocols, which are very important when it comes to network security. Then we'll see encryption algorithms like AES, DES, triple DES. Then how to manage user accounts and password security. Then what are the rules for password management, digital certificates and PKI. And finally, overview of identity access management. So this section is going to be a long section and it is going to be a very interesting section. So let us get started with the first topic of security filtering. So far you have learned a lot about networking standards and related technologies, and even know how to make computers and devices communicate so that you can get a network up and running. But there's more. Because network security is absolutely critical, I'm going to equip you with the knowledge you need to keep your network safe from hackers. Yes, communication and accessing the information you need is all good, but knowing the exactly who is at the other end of the connection is also vital. Now this means that you need ways to confirm that the person or the computer at the other end of the connection is really supposed to be accessing the resource it's trying to, and even whether the resources or the entities that you are contacting are really who and what they appear to be. Seriously, if you don't have network security firmly in place, you are flying dangerously blind. You could be inadvertently exposing critical data to people who have no right to see that information and may even intend to exploit it in a big way. So in this section, we'll focus on some very important pieces of the security puzzle. The first things that are security filtering and user authentication. Now, how do we know who is really at the other end of our connections? The answer to that may seem simple enough, because the computer or the person on the other end must identify him or herself, right? Wrong. That's not good enough, because people, especially hackers, lie. So it's totally naive to assume that person or computer on the other end of the line is who they are claiming to be. Sad but true. Hackers use many tools out there today with the precise goal of convincing us they're someone else. That is, they try to impersonate people. And we all know that someone has been a victim of this and they have failed to identify theft, and that is why, thanks to the bad guys with the right spoofing software in hand, which helps us making easier to identify them. This means it's imperative to control who or what can get into our network by identifying the specific computers. Well, for the starters, I'm going to cover some basic ways to safely allow the computers you want to have access in your network, plus keep the ways out of the ones you honestly don't want people to. The first line of defense is something called as security filtering, which broadly refers to the ways to let people securely access your resources. This process is twofold, and it includes ensuring that only authorized computers get entry to your network, making sure that the data you are sending back and forth between the networks is secured so that it can be intercepted and translated by bad guys. It cannot be intercepted by bad guys, and that is why we need security filtering and the idea of network security. So this was it for this lecture. So the basic idea of security filtering, as the word suggests, is to disallow bad guys from entering into your network and not allowing them to tamper with your data. So there are various security filtering techniques like access control lists, encryption, which we are going to see in this section. So let us get started with the next lecture. So let us begin with the first security filtering technique, that is access control list. It's rare to find a network around these days that aren't connected to the internet. The internet is clearly a public internet network that anyone can connect to, but your company's or personal network is and should be definitely a private one. The catch here is that every time you connect to the internet from a public network, you are instantly vulnerable to security break ins. Now, this is where something we call a firewall comes into play. Firewalls are basically tools that you can implement to prevent any unauthorized access around on public networks and gaining access to your network. The firewalls can either be standalone devices or combined with another hardware device like servers or routers. Now, access control list is the primary weapon of the firewalls, which help us to discard unused packets. Now, access control list, that is ACL, is typically a list. It's not kind of a list, but it's kind of a program that resides on the routers to determine which packets are allowed to route through them based on the requesting device's source or destination internet protocol address, that is the IP address. Oh, and just so you know, ACLs have been around for many decades and have other uses apart from firewalls as well. Now, there's an image on the screen which demonstrates an ACL enabled router. Okay, so what we can see here is, I'll take my pen. What we can see here is that users in the network A, that is, can access network B, right? So the packets that can pass through the router are from this way, from network A to network B. Now, this means that an IP spoofing attack, when someone pretends to have a network address on the inside of the firewall to gain the network access, can still happen if a user in the network B pretends to be located in the network A. So, for example, someone who is here but it is pretending to be here can also access the internal network because it is pretending that it's actually residing here. Now we'll see things like IP spoofing more thoroughly in other sections of network threat and mitigation, but for now let's go back to ACL. So which means B can access A if a secure authentication connection is so B can actually access A only if a secure authentication connection is used, for example HTTPS. But A can access the public network. Now you can create a wide array of access control lists from the very simple to the highly complex, depending on the exact what do you exactly want to have them to do for you. One example is placing separate inbound and outbound access control lists on the router to ensure that the data that is leaving your network comes from a different source than the data that's coming into it. Now, when configuring access control lists between the internet and your private network to mitigate security problems, it is a good idea to deny any address from your internal networks, then deny any local host addresses, that is 127.0.0/8, and deny any reserved private addresses. Deny any addresses in the IP multicast address range, that is 224.0.0/4. Now, none of these addresses should ever be allowed to your internet network. Interestingly enough, because of the way in which in-public IP addresses are issued, with some research you can even create a filter that blocks a country, a state, or even a local area based on the IP addresses. If you want to know more about access control list, I guess I have already attached some resources at the beginning of the section. If I have not, please post a question and answer in the question answer section. I will immediately upload the book. Well, that is it for this lecture. I hope you have understand the function of access control list and why access control lists are important. Now, another technique of security filtering is MAC address filtering and port filtering. in which you discard and allow packets based on the MAC address and the ports, that is the incoming ports on which the data is getting received. Now, most of the time, it's wise to configure the access control list so that they'll allow or deny access based on the IP address of the source or destination device. Generally, we allow or deny IP packets based on the IP address from where they have received. Now, if your network is running on protocol other than the transmission control protocol or the internet protocol, that is TCP/IP, we can filter the traffic based on media access control, that is the MAC address or the hardware address. We have seen the hardware address in our networking sections. If you haven't seen the MAC or IP address, or if you are confused about the MAC, please refer to the computer networking course in which I have discussed everything about these addresses. Now, we can still use a MAC address based access control list if we are running on the TCP/IP, but I would like to tell you that it's a lot easier to deal with the IP address than the MAC address. Another point remember is that even though most firewalls and routers will allow you to create both IP based and MAC based access control lists, doing so can create an exceptionally ugly situation where access is denied when it really shouldn't be. So when it comes to MAC filtering or IP filtering, just make sure that you stick to only one of these, because it is a lot easier to deal with IP address filtering. Now the next thing is port filtering. Access control lists can also be used to filter based on the port numbers as well as the IP address. In fact, the most firewalls by default allow only open ports that we specify. This is another version of the implicit deny, that is, anything not allowed specifically is denied. When managing a firewall, it is important to know the port numbers of all the traffic that needs to be allowed through it. If you do not know the port numbers on which you want to allow the traffic, there's no use of having a port filtering technique, right? You can't just randomly allow and disallow the port numbers. Now, this means that for some of your applications, you will need to read and learn the port numbers being used. This also explains why it's a big deal to know the port numbers of security protocols like SSL and IPsec. Successful management of firewall involves being aware of it and allowing only the ports to keep things running. For example, if you want to place a firewall on your network and if you do not know which ports does the traffic is actually sending, and if you randomly on or make off the port, there's no point in port filtering. Okay, so make sure before you apply port filtering in your networks, you first must be acquainted with all the port numbers on which the protocols are using. That is it for this lecture. We have studied about the MAC filtering and port filtering, which are another two techniques of security filtering. Just thinking about the huge amount of sensitive data that is bouncing all over the internet 24/7 makes me want to scream the word security. It is seriously clear that we need it almost as much as air, right? I hope you understand. Worse, most of that data is sent out over the internet without any encryption or any security measures. But at least not really the sensitive stuff, which should be sent via one of the several different security protocols available today. Now, these vital protocols are really sets of conditions or rules that define how a secure connection is maintained and when we send sensitive data through an unsecure medium like the internet or a wireless connection. Before talking about the security protocols that the network exams or any other placement interviews you can ask on, I'd like to define a few terms. The first one is tunneling. Now, tunneling is basically a means of encapsulating one protocol with another protocol to ensure that the transmission is secure. Now, let's give an example. the lion's share of us use IP protocol, right? That is the internet protocol, known as the payload protocol, which can be encapsulated within a delivery like the delivery protocol like the IPsec. If you take a look at these individual packets, you would see that they're encrypted. If you look at the process as a whole, it appears that a point-to-point tunnel is created over the internet. Now make a note to yourself that usually tunneled protocol works at the higher layer than the layer in which the payload protocol is working. So basically a tunnel is like this. So if you can see here this image, so I'll take my pen. This tunnel is basically the IPsec protocol, and these are the data packets that are going through the internet protocol. It's like a protective measure so that hackers or the interceptors cannot have your data, and generally this is together is encrypted and then sent over. Or you can just encrypt these packets and send through the IP protocol. This is the basic idea of tunneling. You just have to imagine a tunnel, and the cars going through it are the individual packets, and if someone tries to attack the tunnels, or if someone tries to harm that car, the tunnel is there to protect those cars. That is the basic idea of tunneling. In the next lecture, we'll see about the virtual private network. I'm pretty sure that most of you use VPNs, but in the next lecture, let us have a clear idea of why do we need to use VPNs and what are exactly VPNs. Okay, so now let us start with VPN. Now, no worries, virtual private networks aren't really that hard to understand. I'm going to explain in really simple words. A VPN, that is a virtual private network, it fits somewhere between the local area network that we are connected to and the wide area network that connects two or more LANs. And many times may seem just like a WAN link, because your computer on one LAN connects to a different remote LAN and uses its resources remotely. That is the basic definition of a VPN. Now the key difference between the virtual private networks is a big one: security. So the definition of connecting a LAN to a WAN may sound the same, but VPN is much more secure. Now here's the difference. A typical wide area network connects two or more remote local area networks together using someone else's network, like say your internet service provider and a router. Your local host and router see these networks as remote networks and not as local networks or resources. This would be a WAN in its most general definition, right? So a VPN actually makes your local host part of the remote network by using the WAN link that connects to the remote LAN. Now the VPN will make your host appear as though it's actually local on the remote network. This means that we now have access to the remote local area's resources, and that access is very secure. This may sound like a lot like a VLAN definition, that is a virtual LAN, that is, take my host and make it appear local to the remote resources. Just remember that for networks that are physically local, using virtual LANs is a good solution. But for networks that are physically remote, those that span a wide area network, VPNs is the best solution. For a simple VPN, let's use a home office in a country or a city, and on the screen you can show you can see this figure. So what basically here is going on, I am sending data to someone on the internet through a tunnel. Now this is a preventive tunnel through which I am sending the data, and whoever is trying to access is getting rebounded. So neither hacker nor the government can see what is sending between the data, and that is why many people use virtual private networks. Now in some cases, the let's say if you're watching a Netflix movie, now if you're from India or from US, some movies of, let's say, European countries are not allowed to be broadcasted in your country. So what most people do is they make use of VPN, which means that suppose this is Netflix and this is you are trying to directly access Netflix, but you are not able to do that. So I'll use this. So if you're trying to use Netflix, you are not able to do that. So what you do is you access Netflix through this country, this ISP of, let's say, US, and then this ISP sends packet to the Netflix. And let us say this ISP is from a country where the movies are allowed to broadcast. So what is this here? So what does this Netflix thinks that, okay, the packets are received from European country and now I can permit. So this data is again transmitted to the ISP of the country in which the movie is allowed, and again this ISP sends the data back to you. So in this case, instead of this channel, they can use a VPN here. So what actually the user or you use a VPN here, a virtual private network, through which the data is getting transferred. So now there are different types of VPNs. Now why is this so important? Now because the types of VPNs are named based on the kind of role they play in the real world business. So the first one is client to client virtual private network, which is also known as a remote access virtual private network. Now a remote access virtual private network allows remote users like telecommunicators to securely access the corporate network wherever and whenever they need to. It is typical that users can connect to the internet but not to the office via the VPN client because they don't have the correct VPN address and password. This is the most common problem, and one should always check first before trying to access the resources. The next one is host to host VPN. A host to host virtual private network is somewhat like a site to site in concept, except that the endpoints of the tunnel are two individual hosts. In this case, all the traffic is protected from the time it leaves the network interface card of one host until it reaches the network interface card of the next host, which means if you're trying to communicate with your friend and if you're using a VPN, that is a kind of a host to host virtual private network. Site to site virtual private network. Now site to site VPNs, or also known as intranet VPNs, allows a company to connect its remote sites to the corporate backbone securely over a public medium like the internet. Now instead of requiring more expensive area, that is the wide area network connections, this is probably the best solution for connecting a remote office to a main company. So if someone asks you how do you connect your remote office to the main company headquarters, the answer is site to site virtual private networks. And the last kind of VPN is extranet VPN. Extranet VPNs allows an organization, suppliers, its partners and its customers to be connected to the corporate network in a limited way for only business purposes. So these are the types of VPNs that you need to remember. From the exam point of view, or any exam you're going to appear, or any interview you're going to appear for, just make sure that you remember the definition of VPN. Why do we require VPN? The answer is for security purposes. And just remember the 4 types of VPNs that we have just discussed. That is it for this lecture. Now let us have a discussion on secure sockets layer and how SSL and VPN works together. Well, what is SSL? For time being, just ignore the picture, focus on what I'm going to tell you. Now next on the list is the secure sockets layer. Now this security protocol was developed by Netscape to actually work with its browser. and it is based on Rivest, Shamir, and Adelman, that is the RSA encryption algorithm, which is a public key encryption, and it is used to enable the secure session connections over the internet between a web browser and a web server. Now, SSL is service independent. What is the meaning of service independent? It means that a lot of different network applications can be securely connected with it. One of the famous being the ubiquitous HTTPS, that is the Hypertext Transport. You got it right? Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTPS, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. There is no transport word. I was checking on you. So HTTP uses SSL to get the HTTPS protocol. Now, as time marched on, SSL was merged with other transport layer security protocols to form a new protocol that is called as Transport Layer Security, TLS, and the latest version of TLS is TLS 2.0, and it provides a number of enhancements over the earlier versions. Now, several improvements in the operation of the main component of encryption was made. The MD5 or the secure hashing algorithm SHA was being introduced. Hashing functions are used by SSL to ensure that the data is not changed or altered, preserving the integrity of the data, which is one of the most important elements of information security, integrity. Now, more flexibility in the choice of hashing and encryption algorithms on the part of the client and server are also supported by SSL, and it has enhanced support for the advanced encryption standard, that is the AES algorithm. Now, what is, you can see on the screen, I forgot this. This is an SSL connection process. The first thing here, I'll use my highlighter laser pointer. The first thing here is connection request. The PC or the host sends a connection request to the server. Then the server asks if you do need a secure connection. Okay, I'll provide with all the security capabilities. And finally, the SSL connection is established. Now, SSL VPN is really the process of using the secure socket layer to create a virtual private network. All right. A VPN is a secured connection between the two systems that would otherwise have to connect to each other through a non-secured network. Now, here's what I mean. Listen carefully. Now, even though I'd never really let this happen, but let's just say I could connect to the servers in my corporate office through the internet. Okay. Now, you know by now that this would be a very bad thing because the internet is not at all secure, right? But if I connected to all of those servers using a virtual private network with a tunneling protocol, instead, anything that I send from my PC to my corporate office would be locked up nicely and securely, right? Plus, VPNs come in handy for the data that's being sent within a private network that you would probably wouldn't want everyone on the network to be able to see. Maybe you want a specific computers on the intranet to be able to communicate with each other securely. Like, let's say the computers used by your top finance people. Now, you wouldn't necessarily want that data just sent off in the clear to be viewed by the office gossip. Now, would you? No way. So you can put those finance folks on a VPN that's just like having them on their own little private network. Plus, what's even cooler about this setup is that the members of your intranet VPN can still communicate with everyone else whenever they want. So why not use a VPN? So here's it. You can see the server and the SSL VPN gateway. Here is the clear text communication, but when a client wants to connect through the internet to your server, it uses an SSL VPN communication, which provides more security. So that is it for SSL and VPN. Just make sure that you understand why VPN is used alongside with SSL. It is literally a process of using SSL to create a private network. So that is the use of SSL and VPN. Well, that is it for this lecture. I will see you in the next lecture. Now let us have a look at some interesting security protocols or tunneling protocols. The first one is Datagram Transport Layer Security Protocol, that is DTLS protocol. Now this protocol provides security for datagram based applications by allowing them to communicate in a way that is designed to prevent eavesdropping, tampering, or message forgery. So basically this protocol is meant for mitigating basic security attacks like data tampering or data forgery. Now it is based on the stream oriented transport layer security protocol, that is the TLS protocol, and it is intended to provide similar security guarantees. The next protocol is layer 2 tunneling protocol. Now layer 2 tunneling protocol, it was created by the Internet Engineering Task Force, that is the IETF. It comes in handy for supporting the non-TCP IP protocols in VPNs over the internet. Now L2TP, that is layer 2 tunneling protocol, is actually a combination of Microsoft's point-to-point tunneling protocol PPTP and Cisco's layer 2 forwarding protocol L2F protocol. Now a nice L2P, that is layer 2 tunneling protocols feature is that because it works way down there at the data link layer of the OSI model, that is the layer 2, it can support tons of protocols beyond just TCP IP. For example, Internetwork Packet Exchange, that is IPX, and the AppleTech. It's really a great tool to implement if you have to happen two non-TCP IP networks that need to be connected via internet. I just now mentioned about point-to-point tunneling protocol, that is the PPTP protocol. Now this protocol was jointly developed by Microsoft, Lucent Tech, 3Com, and many other companies. It's not actually sanctioned by the IETF, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work. PPTP acts by combining an unsecured point-to-point protocol, that is a PPP session, with a second secured session using the generic routing protocol, that is the GRE protocol. Don't worry, I am going to explain GRE in the upcoming lecture. Now because PPTP, that is point-to-point tunneling protocol, uses two different protocols, that is PPP, point-to-point protocol, and the GRE, that is generic routing protocol, generic routing encapsulation protocol, pardon me, it actually opens up two different network sessions. So be warned, PPT can give you some grief when passing through a router. Now this is a big reason you won't find it around nowadays. Another reason it's going the way of the dinosaurs, that is it is not being used nowadays, is that originally it gained popularity because it was the first virtual network protocol to be supported by Microsoft's dial-in networking services. And not too many of us depend on dial-up to get connected to the internet anymore. That is why the point-to-point tunneling protocol is not being used these days. But as a fact of theory, you should always have knowledge of these protocols, as it was the first VPN protocol supported by Microsoft. Now another one is, in fact, you'd probably expect from a first generation security protocol that this protocol is nowadays really vulnerable to spoofing attacks, which is pretty much being replaced by L2P, that is layer 2 transport tunneling protocol, and the internet protocol secured one, that is the IPsec. Well, that is it. In this lecture, we have seen three major types of protocols, tunneling protocols: the datagram tunneling layer protocol, DTLS, then layer 2 tunneling protocol, L2TP, and PPTP, that is point to point tunneling protocol. I hope you have understood these protocols. If you have any doubt, feel free to answer through the Q&A section, and I will see you in the next lecture. In the last lecture, we had seen point-to-point tunneling protocol, that is PPTP. Now, PPTP is a protocol that allows secure access to a VPN. So just make sure that you remember that for your interviews and other networking exams. Well, in this lecture, we are going to talk about the generic routing encapsulation protocol, that is the GRE protocol. Well, generic routing encapsulation protocol is a tunneling protocol that can encapsulate many protocols inside the IP tunnels. Some examples would be routing protocols like EIGRP, that is Enhanced Interior Gateway Protocol, Gateway Routing Protocol, and the open source path first protocol, that is the OSPF protocol, and IP protocol version 6. Open source shortest path first, right? So now let me first tell you what generic routing protocol is. So basically, generic routing protocol acts as a carrier protocol for many different protocols which want to go through the internet. A GRE tunnel interface supports a header for a passenger protocol or encapsulated protocols like IP or IPv6, which is the protocol being encapsulated by GRE. Now, GRE tunnels are basically they have a GRE header, so that any layer 3, that is the network layer protocol, can be used through the tunnel. GRE is a stateless and has no flow control, and most importantly, GRE offers no security. It also creates additional overhead for tunneled packets, at least 24 bytes. So if this is the VPN site here, let me take my laser pointer. This is the VPN site, and this is another VPN site. And here is this tunnel which acts as a carrier protocol through the IP network, that is the layer 3 of the OSI model. And this is the datagram packet which has the GRE header right over here. So basically it creates a tunnel. They are the tunneling protocols which we have already discussed. The PPTP, then DTLS protocols, all these are tunneling protocols. They provide a path for other protocols to pass through them. In the next lecture, we will talk about the IPsec protocol, which is the most important protocol when it comes to network security practices. So make sure that you get equipped yourself for the next lecture. Before moving ahead, I would like to request you to please review our courses and rate our courses. My team has been dedicating around 5 to 6 months for this course, and we could have easily taken a huge amount from students, but we are offering this course at a very low price just for the sake that we really want to educate you people. In return, you just have to write a nice decent review, or if you're not happy with our course, just provide the honest feedback. I am waiting to see your personalized feedback in the reviews section. So let us get started with IPsec. So now let us begin with another important protocol in network security, and that is the IPsec protocol, or the Internet Protocol Security Protocol, IPsec. On the other hand, IP security was designed by the IETF for providing authentication and encryption. Make sure that you know IPsec works at the network layer of the OSI model and secures all the applications that operate in the layers above it, which means IPsec will provide security for transport layer, for sessions layer, for presentation layer, and for application layer as well. I hope you know the basics of the reference models, the OSI model and the TCP/IP model. Because it is sanctioned by the IETF, as I said earlier, and designed to work with IPv4 as well as IPv6. It has got a huge amount of industry support, and its hence IP security protocol is a gold standard for the virtual private networks on the internet in today's world. Now, IPsec has two major protocols working with it, which are the authentication header AH, and the other one is encapsulating security protocol payload, ESP. Now, this authentication header, I'll take my pen, this authentication header provides authentication services only. Now, authentication services means they authenticate the user through different mechanisms like one-time passwords, username, password, login, anything. But authentication header protocol just helps in authentication of the user. But on the contrary, ESP, that is encapsulating security protocol, provides both authentication and encryption abilities as well. Now, both of these protocols can be used with either mode discussed in the, I'll discuss further. Now, IPsec works in two modes, transport mode and the tunneling mode. Transport mode creates a secure tunnel between the two end-to-end devices. Now, this means that regardless of how many foreign networks, including the internet, the packet traverses, it is protected because it creates a tunnel between two end-to-end devices. Now, the data is protected by authentication and or encryption. On the other hand, in tunnel mode, the tunnel is created between two endpoints such as two routers or two gateway servers, protecting all the traffic that goes through the tunnel. It is commonly used between two offices to protect all the traffic going between the offices regardless of the source and the destination. Now, what is ISA KMP? ISA KMP stands for Internet Security Association and Key Management Protocol, which defines the procedures and packet formats to establish, negotiate, modify and delete security associations. Security associations SA contains information required to execute security services such as header authentication. We have seen in the last couple of minutes, header authentication and payload encapsulation. Now, ISA KMP's real value is the ability to provide a framework for safely transferring key and the authentication data independent of the key generation technique, encryption algorithm and the authentication mechanism. So ISA KMP is integrated into another security mechanisms we have already discussed, for example, the IPsec. Now here's a TCP IP packet in the IPsec mode with authentication header. So you can see TCP IP payload, TCP header, destination, source IP address and IP header. This is the standard TCP IP packet, okay? But when it is combined with authentication header, you have authentication header here and hence authenticated by EH. All of this is encrypted and then sent into a tunnel using the IPsec protocol so that anyone who is trying to access this data will not be able to access it. And this is the tunnel mode where the header is encrypted, TCP IP payload is encrypted and ESP header is added here. This is more powerful, and actually, as I said earlier, there are two modes, tunnel mode and transport mode. So it depends upon the type of service or type of the devices, end-to-end devices which are going to employ. That is it for this lecture. Just remember from the exams and interview points of view, what is the meaning of IPsec and why do we use IPsec? Basically, it's a tunneling protocol to provide more security while transmitting data over the network layer and the layers above it. I will see you in the next lecture. Now we are going to see an interesting protocol that is pretty good privacy. As the name suggests, it is an excellent protocol and the working is very simple to understand. If you have understood the previous cryptography and the public key encryption decryption videos, then this lecture is going to be a wonderful lecture for you. Now in this lecture, I am not going to have any bullet points. I'm just going to explain through the slides. So in the early 1990s, Phil Zimmermann, also from MIT, that is Massachusetts Institute of Technology in US, wrote most of the code for his freely available version of public key encryption designed to encrypt the data for email transmission. PGP is mostly used for email transmission. Make sure you remember that. Zimmermann basically compared email to postcards because anyone can read email messages traversing the internet just as they can postcards traveling through the postal service, right? By contrasting, he compared an encrypted message to a letter mailed inside an envelope, and this is the figure of PGP encryption system. So don't worry, I'm going to explain what exactly is. Now in the figure, you can see on the screen, let me take my pen. Yes. So the document, this is the original document, okay? Now the document is encrypted with a session key. So let's consider this is a session key, okay? Which is then encrypted with the public key of the recipient. So let's say here is the recipient and his public key is available in this key store because public key is a public knowledge. It is available to everyone. Now with this public key, this key is encrypted because we know that whenever you want to send a data over the internet, in order for the recipient to decrypt the data with his private key, you must encrypt the data with the public key. Then only the public key, the private key can decrypt it. Okay. So now this session key is encrypted with the public key of the recipient, and this data is also encrypted with the session key, and then the encrypted document along with the encrypted session key with the help of public key is sent over to the recipient here. Okay, I'll erase it so that you will have a clear picture. Yes. Now let us see how do we explain the decryption process. So once again, I will revise the encryption process. You have a document, you have a session key. With the help of session key, you encrypt that document, and then you encrypt this session key with the help of the public key, and then this encrypted document plus encrypted session key, you send it over to the recipient here. Now when the recipient receives the encrypted document along with the encrypted session key, now since this session key is encrypted with the public key of this recipient, it can be easily decrypted with the help of private key of the recipient. So when the recipient decrypts the encrypted key with his private key, he gets the original session key. And with the help of this session key, he then decrypts this document to form the new document to get the original document. So in this case, what you have to remember is session key encryption is done using symmetric encryption. That is the same key for encryption and the same key for decryption. But in order to transfer the session key over the internet, asymmetric encryption is used. Now asymmetric encryption takes a longer time than symmetric encryption. That is why in order to just transfer the keys, asymmetric encryption is used in most of the today's world. But when it comes to encrypting local documents, the symmetric key encryption is used. So make sure you remember this is the example of pretty good privacy. Okay. Now since the recipient is the only person with the matching private key, only they can decrypt the session key, because there we are using asymmetric key encryption for the personal use only. And the name implies it's really pretty good privacy. RSA data security, that is Rivest, Shamir and Adelman security, and the US federal government both had a problem with Zimmerman's product. Now, the RSA complained about patent infringement, and the government actually decided to prosecute Zimmerman for exporting munitions grade software. But the government actually dropped the charges against Zimmerman, and a licensing fee is paid to RSA. So today, PGP and other public key related products are readily available. But if you cleverly see, this is the most, it actually is a good protocol for encryption and preventing your data over the internet transfer. I hope my lectures are very clear to you, because I'm trying to explain all those things in very simple and clear words. So if you're really enjoying this course, I request you to rate our course, because if you rate our course, the more ratings we get, we really feel good, and we can draft more interesting courses to you, and you can learn a lot from us. So please rate our courses. Your feedback is very valuable to us. I will see you in the next lecture. Great. Now that we have done with pretty good privacy, encryption, decryption, and security part, let us now first focus on remote access. Think of remote access as a telecommunicating tool, because it is used by companies to allow remote employees to connect to the internal network and access resources that are in the office. Well, this pandemic period of COVID-19 has proved to be the most, turning point in the history of IT infrastructure, because almost everyone has started using RAS, that is Remote Access Services. That is why understanding RAS is, very important. Now, remote access is a great for users who work from home or travel frequently, but clearly, to a stalking hacker, using an unsecured remote access connection is like stealing candy from a baby. Using remote access requires a server configured to accept incoming calls, and also requires remote access software to be installed on the client. Now, the first that remote access service we are going to see is RAS. So basically, RAS is not a protocol, but refers to the combination of hardware and software required to make a remote access connection. The term was popularized by Microsoft when the company began referring to its Windows NT-based remote access tools by this name. Users would dial in via modem, be authenticated by the server, and then be asked for their username and password, just as if they were on the local network. Once logged in, users had access to data on the internal network, just as if they were logged in locally. RAS itself was not very secure, but there are options with RAS to include secure protocol tool for tunneling, such as PPTP, that is point-to-point tunneling protocol, and MS-CHAP, that is Microsoft Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol. Remote access service is versatile because it supports several other network protocols in addition to TCP/IP as well. That is why RAS has become very prominent in this 2020 period. And I think you should know about remote desktop connection, because in today's world, you're required to connect to clients, services, and machines through RDP only. So this is the example of remote access service. If a client is here, a remote access client, if a client is here and this is the internet, this is the remote access server which checks for authentication and everything. And then this client can access the remote resources. What is RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol? Now, Remote Desktop Protocol allows users to connect running Microsoft Remote Desktop services, but remote computer must have the right kind of client software installed for this to happen. Most Windows-based operating systems include an RDP client, and so do most other major operating systems like Linux, Solaris, Mac OS X, and others. Microsoft's RDP client software is either called as Remote Desktop Connection (RDC) or the Terminal Services Client (TSC). Microsoft began calling all the terminal services products Remote Desktop with Windows Server 28, and RDP uses TCP port 3389, which means RDP is using transmission control protocol at the transport layer, which is a secure protocol, a reliable protocol, and a connection oriented protocol at port number 3389. Now, after establishing a connection, the user sees a terminal window that's basically a pre-configured window that looks like a Windows desktop after connecting through RDP. The most current version of RDP is version 10.0. When logged in using RDP, clients are able to access local files and printers from the remote desktop just as if they were logged into the network. RDP offers 128-bit encryption using the RC4 encryption algorithm. Now, let us try to have a look at the other remote access protocols in the next lecture. In the last lecture, we talked about the remote access services and the remote desktop protocol. Now, let us get done with the other remaining short access protocols which help us. The first one is the point-to-point protocol. Now, point-to-point protocol is a layer 2 protocol. I forgot to display that. I'm sorry. So yeah, point-to-point protocol is layer 2 protocol that provides authentication, encryption, and compression services to clients logging in remotely. Now, internet service providers use PPP a lot to authenticate clients dialing in with a dial-up modem or a DSL or cable modem. Many network servers that provide remote access services such as RAS can also use PPP as an authentication protocol. Now the next protocol is, we have done with P2P point protocol, PPP. Now the next protocol that we're going to see is this one, the point-to-point protocol over Ethernet. Now, point-to-point protocol over Ethernet is an extension of PPP. Its purpose is to encapsulate the PPP frames within the Ethernet frames. The need for PPPoE was born out of the need to deal with the massive increase in high-speed internet connections. Now, service providers offering customers high-speed access using asymmetric digital subscriber line, that is ADSL, or cable modems needed a way to offer authentication and encryption services of point-to-point protocol. A remote authentication dial-in user service, Radius, which we are going to see in upcoming lectures, is something I'll get into it a little later in this section. Radius is used to manage PPPoE connections. Make sure you remember this sentence. Next is Independent Computing Architecture, ICA. Now, Independent Computing Architecture is a protocol which was designed by Citrix Systems to provide communication between the servers and the clients. The most common application that uses ICA is Citrix WinFrame, which administrators can use to set up Windows application on a Windows-based server and then allow the clients with virtually any operating system to access those applications. Client computers running Linux, Unix, or Mac OS can access Windows-based applications using the ICA protocol. Now, connections like these, which I just told you, tend to be slow because of the huge amount of translation that is required to enable the client and the server to communicate with each other properly. The next protocol is Secure Socket Shell, that is SSH. You have heard this protocol when it comes to ethical hacking or networking earlier. Secure Shell is a network protocol that is designed as an alternative to command-based utilities such as Telnet. Now, Telnet is a protocol that transmits requests and responses in clear text and hence provides no security. Whereas SSH creates a secure channel between the devices and provides confidentiality and integrity of the data transmission. SSH uses public key cryptography to authenticate the remote computer and allow the remote computer to authenticate the user if necessary. Now, this public key is placed on any computer that must allow access to the owner of the matching private key, which is kept secret obviously, and the private key is never transferred to the network during authentication. So just make sure that SSH is an alternative to Telnet and it is more secure. The next and the last remote access service protocol that we're going to see is VNC, that is virtual network computing. Virtual network computing, VNC, is a remote desktop sharing system that uses the remote frame buffer protocol. Now VNC includes VNC server, that is a software which runs on the machine sharing its screen, then a VNC client, that is a machine that receives the shared screen, and the VNC protocol, which is again a type of RDP, remote desktop protocol. Now one big difference between VNC and RDP is that VNC sends raw pixel data, which does make it work on any desktop type, whereas RDP sends graphic primitives on higher level commands for the screen transfer process. Well, this was it for the other protocols. We have seen RAS, we have seen RDP, we have seen PPP, point-to-point over Ethernet, ICA, secure shell, and virtual network computing. For your exam or any network-based exam or clearing your interviews exam, you just have to remember these protocols and you will come out with flying colors. That is it. I will see you in the next lecture. In the last couple of lectures, we saw the account management features of the user, maintenance account, and all those management things related to account. But in this lecture, we'll start with password management, why it is really important to manage the password and the guidelines for different passwords. Like any other aspect of network security, passwords must be managed, and doing that involves ensuring that all the accounts follow security guidelines so that the bad guys cannot easily guess or crack them. You have also got to implement certain features of a network operating system to prevent unauthorized access to your system. The fundamental rule when it comes to password is a password is a combination of alphanumeric and special characters that's easy for you to remember but really hard for someone else to guess. Now, like server account names, they should never be written down on anything that is then put into your desk or stuck onto your computer. Do not write your password on a sticky note or a post-it and just paste it in front of your desktop just because you cannot remember. No, that is very wrong. You should remember your password, and that is why you should keep your password such that you should be able to remember it. Now, unfortunately, this guideline is only followed in a perfect world. Users invariably try to make things easy on themselves by choosing passwords that are so simple to guess that someone would have to be seriously mentally challenged not to be able to. I had a friend whose name was Mike and he was born in the year 1976. Now, what Mike did was basically I was able to hack into his system, not actually hack. I just tried to, tried 2 to 3 attempts and I was successful on the third attempt. Now, what he did is he took his first name, Mike, and he added @ symbol, the one that we use in the email address, and then he added the last 2 digits of his birth year, which means Mike @76. So that was very easy. Please do not tend to keep such passwords because you never know, because nowadays your information is available all over the internet. Your birth date is available on Facebook, your username, your user IDs are available on LinkedIn, Instagram. So people can easily access your password. So make sure that you keep a password which is difficult to crack. Now, strong passwords should be at least 8 characters. Now, the more the characters, the good it is for you, but they shouldn't exceed more than 15 characters, so that if you exceed more than 15 characters, it will be very difficult for you to remember. You absolutely must specify a minimum length for passwords, because a short password is easily cracked. If a password is worth of 4 characters, there are 2 to 4 combinations of those characters, or 4 to 4 at the max, so that it can be easily cracked. Now, the upper limit depends on the capabilities of your operating system and the ability of your users to remember the complex password. So let's have a weak list for passwords. Never use them. Never include proper names. Never include pet names, your spouse's name, children's name, your mother's name, your father's name, any important dates, and do not include the username in your password. Also, try to avoid color, occupation, company name in your password, and any of the above with a leading number, any of the above with a trailing number. And there are more, but you get the idea, and these are really the most commonly used brainless passwords. As I gave the example of Mike, try to avoid using such passwords, and it will be try to keep a password that is easier for you to remember, but it is difficult for hackers or bad guys to get into. But that is it. In the next lecture, we'll see the different password parameters and how to manage the passwords. And I will also talk about security audits. I will give you a short intro of security audits and why they are important when it comes to user account management. In the last lecture, we saw some password management techniques. Now we'll have a look at the guidelines for managing the passwords. Now, why security audits are important, I will discuss this after some time, but now let us, for time being, we'll focus on the password management. Now, using characters is very important. Generally, we know that passwords are a combination of numbers, letters, and special characters. And by special characters, I mean the symbols that you can see on the screen right now. Now, whenever you are using or whenever you are setting a new password, make sure that you use all the combinations possible. Don't just create a password of numbers or just simply letters. Include special characters, because it becomes really hard for the bad guys to actually get into the system. For example, vsecure is the password. So vsecure is an easy combination to guess, but if we include v@secure !1805, then that becomes a very difficult, because whenever there is password cracking involved, there is mostly what we call is a random attack, brute forcing attack, in which different combinations are tried, and with using different letters and special characters. So more the complex password, it becomes more difficult for the system to generate random numbers and then start brute forcing the password. Now the next thing, as I said earlier, ws1805 @NS and hash. Now there are 2 special symbols which I have included. Now many websites do allow all the special symbols, but a few websites will have restrictions on using those symbols, but they will specify which symbols are allowed while you are creating a new password. So make sure you set a strong password with a combination of different numbers, letters, and special characters. Also, you can include uppercase and lowercase characters, as you have experience with many websites nowadays. They make it compulsory to have one uppercase alphabet and a lowercase alphabet along with one number, and the password length should be at least 7 to 8 characters. Now there are various audit tools for password cracking, which may check for a certain possibility of password cracking. If the system is taking too long, which means the password policy is good to go and the passwords are really well. So you can use audit tools. Like there are many tools available which have a password cracking feature. So most auditors do use those tools while they are checking for passwords. Now, the next important thing is locking out after a few unsuccessful attempts. Many banking websites do employ this kind of policy where if a user tries to unlock their account, and if they fail after 3 to 4 attempts, the account gets automatically disabled for a specific period of time. Now, why this is a good thing? Because many bad guys have the option of brute forcing. So if you brute force a password and if it fails, obviously it will fail for a few more random permutations and combinations. At that time, if the system or the server detects that more number of unsuccessful attempts have been happened, the account can be disabled, and hence this increases the security measure when it comes to password management. Now next is disabling account. Now again, as I said earlier, disabling account is more beneficial than deleting or keeping the account as it is. So whenever someone tries to have unsuccessful attempts, either lock out the entire account or just disable the account for a specific period of time so that no one can really access the account. Now, manually unlocking the account. Yes, in some cases with extra high security or server security, if the upper management or a person tries, if his or her account gets locked, then he or she has to manually contact the administrator to unlock the account. Now, this happens only in case where the accounts need to be very secure. For example, let's say the upper management of Deloitte. Now, those people are very they have very secured accounts, and their information is very valuable to the firm, and that is why they generally have to contact the IT department in order to get such things done. Now in many cases it may happen, in some cases it may happen that the administrator himself or herself forgets the password. But yeah, if you are an administrator, make sure that you carve the username and the password in your mind, because if you forget the password, then there's no going back. However, when it comes to Windows, Windows NT provides a different or another administrator account apart from the original one, so that even if the second administrator account gets locked up, the original administrator account is still available. But you should always remember your password. That is one way of getting your memory work for you. So instead of writing down your passwords or noting down them on sticky notes and posting it on your desk, eat almonds every day. It helps you to remember more. And please remember your passwords, because they are very crucial. They are the first point of access for your information. Password history. This is also very important when it comes to password management. Now, set passwords to expire after a fixed duration. That is right. Okay, let me just get back. Yeah, so what happens is, most of the time we are so we get so used to one password because we set that password at every website. So it is a good practice to remove those passwords and generate a new password after a fixed duration. For most of the companies, the duration is around 30 to 45 days. But now, since the bad guys are one step ahead of the normal people, many organizations have started using a different timeline. For example, your password will expire after 26 days, or your password will expire after 42 days. And after that, the employees or the people have to again set a new password. Now, setting a new password is a very good practice, because the more the number of passwords are changed frequently, the less hackers can hack the system and try to access your files and records. As I said earlier, bad guys are one step ahead of the normal people or the employees. You have to, think like a bad guy. Now, if the bad guys know that the password is going to change after 30 or 45 days, they may send a malicious link to the user on the 30th day saying that please change your password. So in that case, we have to set a different timeline for the individual companies. Employee password history. So password history is a great use, because if you try to let's say Google has a password history which doesn't allow you to keep the same password if it's already in the password history. For example, generally Password history stores up to 20 least used at least passwords, which means the last 20 passwords are already stored on the machine or the server, and you're not allowed to use or keep a password from one of them. For example, I can keep a password like vsecure at the rate 1805 or ws@105. Then these two are different passwords, but after let's say 5 to 6 attempts, I again try to reset my password to vsecure at the rate 1805. It will not allow me because this password has already been in the password history. So make sure that you keep a new password and try to remember that password. Now make it mandatory for users to change passwords. Most of us are of the tendency that, you know what, we have set one password, just keep it, just remember it and forget. We'll set that password for every other account. But it is a good practice to change the passwords. Changing frequency is important. As I also said earlier, that bad guys can hack your systems, but if your password changing frequency is very good, then it becomes very difficult for them to crack the passwords. Well, that is it for this lecture. Again, guys, if you are really enjoying this course, if you have learned something valuable, please rate our course because we are lacking support from your side. All you need to do to support us is to just give a rating and share your feedback through the reviews. It will really help us and motivate us to draft more courses. I will see you in the next lecture. Now we are done with user account management and the password management. Now let us move on to a different authentication way, which is single sign-on. As you can see on the screen, this image, through one login exchange or one authentication, you can access many different third-party websites and softwares. So what exactly is single sign-on? Single sign-on is an authentication method that enables users to securely authenticate with multiple applications and websites by using just one set of credentials. Well, do you click does it click a name in your mind? Oh, you're damn right, Google. Yes, Google is an example. Sign in with Google is an example of single sign-on. How does SSO work? So basically, SSO works on based upon a trust relationship set up between an application known as the service provider and an identity provider like OneLogin. Now this trust relationship is often based upon a certificate that is exchanged between the identity provider and the service provider. This certificate that is being sent from the identity provider to the service provider so that the service provider knows it is coming from a trusted source. In SSO, that is single sign-on, this identity data takes the form of tokens which contain identifying bits of information about the user, like a user's email address or a username. So what here it is, you can see, I'll just choose my pen. So here is the user and he's browsing to domain 1 as well as to domain 2. Now he is required to sign in domain 1 as well as in sign in to domain 2. So when he is required to sign in to domain 2 here, the domain 2 redirects it to authentication server, and we can see a button sometimes on the website saying let's log in with Google. So when we click that login with Google, it sends us to the authentication server, which is the Google's Gmail or any sign-in server, and when we sign in, it provides a token to the browser and it gets stored in the cookie, and then finally we can get redirected to domain 2's account. This is using a central authentication domain. Just forgive me for the shapes and drawings. I'm not that good at drawing shapes, but yes, I hope you understand what I'm trying to exactly tell you about single sign-on. So what is an single sign-on token? Let us move on to next image. An SSO token is a collection of data or information that is passed from one system to another during the SSO process. The data can simply be a user's email address and information about which system is sending the token. Tokens must be digitally signed for the token receiver to verify that the token is coming from a trusted source. The certificate that is used for this digital signature is exchanged during the initial configuration process. So let us have a look at this example. First, watch it. User browses to this website, domain 1. Well done. I've drawn a good oval shape. So now this domain 1, when user tries to access or log into his account in domain 1, what does this domain 1 does? It redirects this to the authentication server that we just saw in the last image. Now, what does this authentication server does is it either user logs in or the cookie is available, as I said, in the browser itself. Now, once this authentication server verifies that, okay, this user is legitimate, it stores the cookie in the browser cookie storage. Okay, it stores the cookie in the browser cookie storage, and then this domain sends a token to this browser cookie storage and checks whether this is a legitimate user or not. And after that, it uses the token to authenticate the user, and finally user gets logged in and it stores the domain 1 cookie in the browser cookie storage. Now let's say user browses to domain 2, then domain 2, after it redirects the domain 2 to token to the authentication server, and then it happens the same process. It happens every along with. So the first step here is user browses to this domain. Now this domain tries to access user logging in, which redirects the user to authentication server. Authentication server checks that, okay, vSecure is trying to log in, no problem. Let's give the cookies to the browser cookie storage, and this authentication server verifies that, okay, this is vSecure and I have the vSecure's credentials. And this authentication server then tells this domain that, okay, just trust me, I know this is vSecure, so please allow him to log into your website. And domain says, okay, no problem, there is no issue. And the domain then uses the token to authenticate, and finally the user gets logged in into website. This is how single sign-on works. Now the major benefit of single sign-on is you don't have to remain multiple passwords. That is why Google, being the authoritative server in this case and the server that is relied upon by most of the websites and apps, we will find a option to log in using Google, if you know what I mean. Go to any website, go to any well-known Shutterstock or FreePic or any other website. You will have an option to typically sign in with Google. That is an example of single sign-on. Also, when you are signed in to Gmail in one account, and if you want to access Google on different account, again the single sign-on feature is used when you want to access it, because you are trying to access it through two different accounts. This is the basic idea that goes behind the single sign-on procedure. Now, if you ask me, is SSO secure? Is single sign-on really secure? Now, the answer to this question is it depends. There are many reasons why SSO can improve security. A single sign-on solution can simplify username and password management for both the users and the administrators. Users no longer have to keep a track of different sets of credentials and can simply remember a single more complex password. SSO can also cut down the amount of time the help desk has to spend on assisting users with lost passwords. Administrators can centrally control requirements like password complexity and MFA, that is the multi-factor authentication. But since every coin has two sides, single sign-on does have some drawbacks. For example, you might have applications that you want to have locked down a bit more. For this reason, it would be important to choose an SSO solution that gives you the ability to say require an additional authentication factor before a user logs into a particular application, or that prevents users from accessing certain applications unless they are connected to a secure network. So with this, we are done with SSO, and SSO is very important, and you should understand SSO and SAML. But for this lecture, for the exam point of view or from your interview preparation, just make sure that you remember what is SSO. No one is going to ask you this procedure that we just saw on the screen. You just have to tell what SSO is and what are the drawbacks and what are the advantages and how SSO is implemented in your terms. Again, guys, I'm warning you, if you're doing this course just for the sake of certification, please don't do it. Knowledge is very important when it comes to having a career in cybersecurity. Even back in my period, even when I was doing cybersecurity, my trainer always told me to first understand the concepts rather than just learning them. So make sure you understand single sign-on. Unless and until you understand single sign-on, you don't have to memorize it. All the best, and I will see you in the next lecture. Great. Now we are moving to the last lecture of this section, which is authentication, authorization, and accounting. In computer security, AAA, like the Auto Club, refers to the authentication, authorization, and accounting. AAA is more robust version that adds auditing into the mix and it becomes 4 times A. But AAA and 4 times A aren't really protocols. They are systematic conceptual models for managing network security through one central location. Now, two common implementations of AAA are Radius and TACA CS+. Let us see what Radius is. Radius stands for Remote Authentication Dial-in User Service. Although its name implies the Remote Authentication Dial-in User Service is not a dial-up server. Like pretty much everything else, it originated that way, but it's evolved into more of a verification service. Today, Radius is an authentication and accounting service that's used for verifying users over various types of links, including dial-up. Many internet service providers use a Radius server to store the usernames and passwords of their clients in a central spot through which connections are configured to pass authentication requests. Radius servers are client-server based authentication and encryption services maintaining user profiles in a central database. Radius is also used in firewalls. Now, purposed this way, when a user wants to access a particular TCP/IP port, they must provide a username and a password. The firewall then contacts the Radius server to verify the credentials given. If the verification is successful, the user is granted access to that port. Now, Radius is an authentication server that allows for domain-level authentication on both the wired and the wired wireless networks. So now, as you can see on the screen, the first step is let's say I'm Joe. Now I tell the terminal server that, hey, I'm Joe. The terminal server then contacts a Radius server. Hey man, I don't know who is talking to me. How do I tell who Joe is? The Radius server simply says, well, dumb man, you can just ask for a password, right? Okay, terminal server then asks me, what is your password? I reply with PWD. Then the terminal server, which is acting like a dumb server here, tells the Radius server says it's PWD. The Radius server says, yes, that is Joe. Now again, the terminal server asks, can Joe log in? Again, the Radius server says, obviously man, he can now log in. And now the terminal server replies to me, okay, you are logged in. And finally, the terminal server tells the Radius server, okay, so Joe just logged in. So in many systems today, this terminal server can be eliminated and the host can directly now log into the Radius server. So let us now have a more advanced version of this, which is Terminal Access Controller, Access Control System Plus, TACA Control CS Plus. Now the Terminal Access Controller, Access Control System Plus, TACACS Plus protocol, it is a protocol, is also a AAA method and an alternative to Radius. Like Radius, it is capable of performing authentication on behalf of multiple wireless access points remote access servers, or even local area network switches that are 802.1x capable. Now, based on its name, you would think it's an extension of the TACACS protocol, but the two definitely aren't compatible. So as you can see on the screen, the Terminal Access Control System Plus start, user trying to connect. The authentication system asks the user to get the username, then to server they give username, to get password, to give the server password, indicate the password success or failure, then shell service is included, indicate if password fail, execution, command, stop, record, and the record was received. So this is how the Terminal Access Control System Plus works. Now, just to clarify, in the IT world, accounting has nothing to do with money. So don't get confused with AAA. Let me just write down here AAA. So this stands for authentication, this stands for authorization, and this one stands for accounting. But this A has nothing to do with money. Okay, this has nothing to do with money. What I mean is when a TACACS plus session is closed, the information in the following list is locked or it is accounted for, which means the information about the connection is stored. That is accounting. So after a couple of incidents, the information that is being stored can be used as logs to check for the incident. That is an example of AAA. Now here's the difference between Radius and TACACS+. Now actually Radius combines only authentication and authorization. It does not store any kind of record. If you go here, you can see the record was received, which means it is also accounting. It is also storing that thing. The record was received. You can see here. So the TACACS Plus actually stores everything that is authorization. It authorizes the user, it authenticates the user, and it also keeps the record. Now Radius only encrypts the password, but TACS encrypts both the username and the password. Now the Radius requires each network device to contain authorization configuration and the central management for only authorization configuration. Now actually Radius is designed for the subscriber AAA, but here it is designed for administrator AAA. Now you don't have to actually remember the difference between Radius and TACS. It's actually you just have to remember what AAA stands for, and on your exam you just have to remember the working of Radius and just have an overview of TACS. Just make sure that you understand the difference between these two terms. Well, that is it for this lecture of AAA. I'm glad that you have completed this section, this network security section. If you have any doubts, please feel free to ask us. And if you're enjoying this course, do not forget to rate the course. I will see you in the next lecture.